Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for my weekend reading report. It's time for my weekend reading report, the spellbinding program where I talk about all the stuff that I read during the previous week. It's always exciting. This is always exciting stuff, Roger. Roger agrees. As always, he is thrilled to be here. So let's talk about all the stuff that I read during the past week. So, didn't have as much time this week as I did last week, so I didn't read as much stuff, but I got some stuff read. So let's talk about it. So let's break out my handy little tablet here, paper tablet, in which I record all the books that I read for my 500 book challenge. The challenge where I have to read 500 books before I'll buy any new ones. 500 books I own before I buy any new ones. I know you're sick to death of hearing about it. I know. I won't talk about it anymore. Yes, I will. I lied. Anyway, book number 127. Book 127. Let me get it. It was this book. It's Tales from the Crypt, the EC Archives, Volume 1. The challenge is going much better now that I'm including comic book collections and graphic novels, I have to say. So I am starting to read all of my EC Archives collections of EC Comics. It's about time I started reading these since I've been picking them up forever. And now I've got a pile of them. So this is Tales from the Crypt, Volume 1, which has the first 6 issues of Tales from the Crypt from EC Comics, the greatest comic book company which ever existed. EC Comics was the best, man. It was the best. And their comics from the early 50s, man, dynamite stuff. Kind of got a bit of, I'm not going to say it was a rocky start, but kind of a slow start as far as their horror comics are concerned. The first couple issues in this are kind of tame because they were moving from being a crime comic book into horror. And so the first couple issues still have a lot of their old crime comics in them. And as far as their horror goes, it hadn't reached its level of the level of extremity that EC Comics eventually reached, you know, where people are playing baseball with body parts and guts and things like that. You know, that stuff comes. But still, by the third issue, it was starting to become itself. It has some pretty good stuff by some of my favorite writers and artists of all time. It's just magnificent. Tales from the Crypt. Yeah, it's awesome. So these are the earliest Tales from the Crypt issues. Finished this up, and I enjoyed it very much. It's great. It's great. And so I'm following it up with this. I'm reading this one now. The Vault of Horror, Volume 1. I'm just going to go through all my Volume 1s of the EC Archives. So I'm going to go on to like The Haunt of Fear and Two-Fisted Tales, which was awesome. And their war comic. I think it was it Frontline Combat? I only have the war comic in digital form. I don't have physical copies of those. But I think I have at least 2 or 3 archive editions of the war comic, and I remember it being good. So that's good. And the science fiction stuff, weird science, weird fantasy, shock suspense stories. I'm going to go through it all. Read all the first volumes and then move on to the second volumes. And this is the one I'm reading now, Vault of Horror, which is awesome. Look at that cover. It's great. It's great stuff. So I'm reading that. And Tales from the Crypt was 127 on the 500 book challenge. Moving on to 128 was this book, Mythico Wood by Robert Holdstock, which I talked a little bit about last week because I had started it. And my initial thoughts on it were that it was a good book. I recognized right away it was good. And it felt, at the portion I was at, it felt more like a folk horror novel than it did a fantasy novel. And it kind of keeps that. It keeps that folk horror element all the way through it. And I mean, it's it's a fantasy, but it's a dark fantasy in that the creatures and characters in this, the fantasy creatures and characters, are very dangerous and strange. And the way it's written, it lends these fantasy creatures a degree of reality as you're reading them. It seems real while you're reading this stuff. Just the way he wrote the book and the way he presented the fantasy characters, which are really horror as well. It's good. It has some great creepy moments, and it's really an involving book. It's more than good. I said it's good, but it's a good deal more than good. When I finished it, when I do the Goodreads thing where when I finish a book, I put the little star rating on it, and I suck at star ratings. I pretty much give 4 stars to like everything except Robert E. Howard, who automatically gets a 5. But I'm always giving 4 stars, I'm crap at giving star ratings. So I gave this 4 stars. And I think I gave it that because when I finished it, my feeling was that the mythicos, the creatures in the book, the mythic creatures in the book, very early on in the book, these creatures their existence is explained. Right away or close to right away, you learn what these beings are and why they exist. And my feeling was, if they had kept that more of a mystery, like why do these creatures exist? If that was a mystery throughout the book to the end, and maybe you gradually learn what it was, I think it would have been better. That was my initial feeling. But this is one of those books which is so great that it just lingers in your mind. And after I finished this, I just kept thinking about it. And I'm still thinking about it. It's one of those books. And I think it deserved 5 stars instead of 4 because this is a beautiful book, actually. As horrific and frightening and disturbing as it is, it's just beautifully written. And you become very involved in the characters. And I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure that I was right as far as the mythicos are concerned. Now that I'm thinking about it, or after thinking about it a bit, I understand why they were explained early. Because the book really isn't about the mythicos, these creatures. It's not really about that. It's really about the difficulties you can have in family difficulties, family trauma, the cost of obsession. It's about a lot of things, and least of all, really about the mythicos. You could write probably a whole book about the themes in Mythico Woods, or Mythico Wood. There's a lot going on in this book, and it's not terribly long either, but it's just great. It's a great book. Like I said, I became very involved in the characters, in the situations, and what was going on. I found it quite gripping, and I was sorry to see it end. Although it has a great ending. The ending of this book is it's excellent. This is good stuff. Great stuff, really. Like I said, I should have put 5 stars because it's a beautiful book and one I'm going to be thinking of for a long, long time. There are other books that Holdstock wrote that are sequels to this. So this is actually a series of books. But I have to read many books before I get those because I don't own any of those books. This is the only one of the series that I own. One day I will read them, though. I just have to finish the 500 book challenge first, which one day I will finish. So I will get to the rest of these. It'll just be a while. And then that'll give me a chance to reread this because I will want to reread this because it's that good. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. If you haven't read this yet and you want a dark fantasy to read or a folk horror book to read or something like that, get this. Read this. I should have read this a long time ago, but I'm glad I read it now. It's a wonderful book. Mythico Wood. 5 stars, man. So that was great. And what else did I read? Okay, book number 129 on the 500 book challenge. Book 129. I read on my Magic tablet, and it's this book. This is The Mighty Thor by Walt Simonson, Volume 2. And be quiet over there, Rhonda. Rhonda's trying to interrupt my video, as she likes to do, with her misbehavior. So, Thor, The Mighty Thor by Walt Simonson, Volume 2. This is fantastic. It was, if anything, even better than Volume 1. Just excellent stuff. Let me find something cool in here. You know, because it's digital, you have to like do this kind of thing. You can't just go to like a really cool page really easily. Well, here he is fighting some devil dog creatures. It's awesome stuff. Walt Simonson, man. Oh yeah, here we go. Doom. So this is the Great Menace. Suthor and his demons are the Great Menace in this volume. And we have a multiple issue arc involving, well, involving the doom of Asgard. And it's amazing. It's amazing stuff. And yeah, Walt Simonson, man. I am now convinced that this is indeed the greatest period for Thor. It even surpasses Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's great run on Thor, as magnificent as that was. And this builds on that. And this series by Simonson builds on everything that came before. But yeah, this is the best. This is the best Thor, Walt Simonson's Thor. So I finished that this morning, Volume 2, and I'm going to move on to Volume 3 tomorrow morning. So that was great. So I read that. Did I read anything else? Yes. I keep forgetting to mention that I'm also, among many of the other things I'm doing, I'm also reading Conan. And this is the first Conan omnibus, and I am that far. I'm a little more than halfway through. These are the original Conan the Barbarian color comic books from Marvel Comics. I'm going to read every single issue of Conan. Eventually I'll read them all. And this has, how many issues does this have? This has 26 issues, the first 26 issues of Conan the Barbarian. And almost all of it is done by, of course, Roy Thomas and the great Barry Smith and Barry Windsor Smith. And look at that. That's from this issue here. That's issue 20. That's the issue I'm on, or I'm going to start probably tomorrow. And just look at that splash page. Man, beautiful stuff. Just beautiful, beautiful stuff. So I'm really, really enjoying that. But that is not all of the Conan that I've been reading. Let me once again break out my Magic tablet and I see if I can pull this up. God, let's see. My Magic tablet is very old, so it is not quite as quick as I would like it to be. I'm back, because I'm sure I edited that part out. So, I also read this. This is Conan the Barbarian from Titan Comics. This is issue, does it even say? I think it was issue 10. Was this issue 10? I lost track. Does it say anywhere? Yeah, it's issue 10. Okay, this is issue 10 of Conan the Barbarian from Titan Comics, and it was fantastic. It's this new series from Titan Comics, man. It has been just a wonderful series of Conan comic books. It's surpassed my hopes for this series. I initially was a little worried about this series when it first started, but it's fantastic. I mean, this issue is just as good as last issue. Let me get to something cool here. And its artwork's wonderful. And spoiler alert, King Kull makes an appearance in this because it's, you know, we've got some time travel shenanigans, but the artwork is just beautiful. It's just a beautifully done comic books. De La Torre does the artwork. And it's just wonderful. So, yeah. Rob De La Torre. It's great, great stuff. So, yeah, the new Conan series. If you haven't checked that out, you should check it out. So, there's that. What am I reading right now as far as a book, though? I am reading something right now. So Horror Mayhem is just around the corner. It's nearly here, Horror Mayhem. And so I was thinking I should just start reading horror. And because I just can't stick to a TBR to save my life, I picked up something different than all of the stuff I said I was going to read for Horror Mayhem. And I picked up this, Stephen King's Skeleton Crew. So I am reading all of Stephen King's books very slowly in publication order. And this is the book I was up to. And it's a book of short fiction with The Mist in here, which is a novella. I think it's long enough to be a novella. Anyway, it's at least a long short story. So shorter stuff in this book. So perfect for Horror Mayhem, which is an event which concentrates on shorter horror fiction. I read this once years and years ago when I was a teenager, and I remember really liking it. And I really, really liked, you know, upon doing this project, when I read Night Shift, his first short story collection, I thought that was great. Night Shift was wonderful. So I was very anxious to start reading this. This, I don't believe, is going to turn out to be as good as Night Shift. Well, I guess I'm over halfway through it already. Very readable stuff. The Mist, the opening story, the novella, The Mist, which was made into a film, which was really good. Actually better than the story itself, actually, because the ending was better, in my opinion, for the film. This is kind of, it looks like it's going to be really hit and miss. I like The Mist a lot. It does have, Stephen King manages to put like every Stephen King stock character into this little short book. I mean, all of these characters, they're just like characters you would find in a Stephen King book. He just puts them all in here. You've got the religious nut, and you've got, you know, it's got everything in here. And it's really good. It's a really good story. I don't think it's great. But it's really good. And I've liked it better than everything else I've read in here. What else did I read? Here There Be Tigers, which is a tiny little story, which I guess was a short story that he wrote when he was pretty young. And that was pretty good for what it was. Then there's The Monkey. The Monkey, about a haunted toy, basically. A cursed toy or haunted toy or whatever it was. And that was good, but too long, which is kind of a theme, I think, for some of these stories. Some of these stories, I think, would be better if they were not just too long, which, you know, is a problem that Stephen King has with some of his books. But he also seems to have that with some of his stories. It is interesting that some of these stories are so different from each other. I mean, you've got science fiction stories, you've got straight horror stories, you've got stories that aren't horror or science fiction. So we've got a pretty fair mix in here, it looks like. But like I said, like there's a story, The Jaunt, which has a dynamite ending. Great ending. But the story itself is just way too long and has a bunch of stuff I feel like that it didn't really need. You know, it could have been like a 5-page story and it would have worked just as well. Stephen King has that going on. So I don't think that this is going to be as good a collection as Night Shift. I'm already halfway through it, so yeah, I could pretty much say that. But maybe the last half will just be fantastic. We'll see. It's a good collection. It's just not a great collection as far as I can tell. So, Night Shift. It's good, but not great. So far, you know, I'll still be reading this when Horror Mayhem starts, probably. So this is the first Horror Mayhem selection. And I know I did a whole like TBR video of all the stuff I'm going to read during Horror Mayhem. But you know, I was looking around, you know, and like, I still have this left over to read. I have a couple other Arkham House volumes I want to read that I never got to, including Alone with the Horrors from Ramsey Campbell, which I think I was going to read for last Horror Mayhem, but just never did. I've still got this lurking around, and I still have this Clark Ashton Smith volume from Arkham House. And I still haven't read this, and I've intended to read this. So, you know, this is kind of fantasy and horror, but I think it would work. So who the heck knows what I'm actually going to be reading this month? I should just stop TBRs. I should just stop doing them. Because I always veer away and just like, oh, I see something lying around, or I hear somebody mention a book I have and haven't read yet, and I'll just go read that. I'm terrible with TBRs. Oh, and that's everything I read, I think. Yeah, that's everything I read. But I did get a couple things in the mail. I'm still getting Epic Collections. They are exempt from the 500 book challenge. So I got this really cool Epic Collection. This is X-Men Fatal Attractions, X-Men Epic Collection Volume 23, which has stories from 1993 to 1994. I love Epic Collections because they're very complete. I mean, they pack a lot in these big fat collections. This one has Uncanny X-Men 301 through 306, but it also has the title X-Men, which was a title that was started in the 90s. Has X-Men issues 24 through 25. It has X-Men Unlimited number 2, Wolverine number 75, and it also has the Gambit miniseries issues 1 through 4. So it has the whole Gambit miniseries. So it's got a bunch of stuff in here. So that's cool. I got X-Men. And I also got Avengers West Coast Avengers Volume 7, which has stories from 92 to 93. So this is West Coast Avengers 83 to 95. So rolling right along with everybody's favorite Avengers series, West Coast Avengers. I actually remember really liking this series. I know some people didn't like it so much, but I remember liking it. Although I didn't read all of it, and now I have them all. So, you know, I will eventually read them all. So there's that. This week, I'm actually going to be making some videos that are about books. I look back at some of the videos I did this past week, and I'm like, those sucked. So I'm going to make some videos about books coming up. Unfortunately, for some of you, I think I'm probably going to do 2 comic book videos this week instead of just 1. I know my audience loves the comic book videos. Roger's right with you on that. Not his favorite content, but some of my viewers like when I talk about comic books. So I've got a couple of those videos, and I've got a backlog of video ideas that I have to make videos about. And so yeah, I'll talk about books this week, I promise. I promise. Okay guys, I will catch you next time.